Get your hands off my son! Mason Vance's roar thundered through the hangar, and everything came to a dead stop. We're in a private luxury hangar in Miami. Italian suits, evening gowns, and champagne glasses sparkling under the lights. Everything was supposed to be perfect, but in one corner a few workers were rushing a forklift, hauling the last crates of champagne for the party. They were behind schedule, and in their rush, disaster struck. Just seconds earlier, Leo, 6 years old, Mason's son, had been running around carefree nearby. A heavy wooden crate stacked with champagne slipped off the fork. It plummeted. No one in the crowd noticed. No one but Eleanor Hayes, a 62-year-old black woman in a worn, frayed coat. She lunged forward, pulling the boy down and back just as the crate slammed into the concrete. Crash! Glass exploded, liquid splashed across the floor, and the sharp reek of alcohol filled the air. The whole room jolted. Leo gasped, eyes wide, chest heaving. But Mason? He didn't see the danger that had nearly crushed his son. He didn't see the moment Eleanor shielded the boy with her own body. All he saw was a ragged old woman sprawled across his child. "Security! Get this filth out of here!" Mason barked, face flushed red, fingers stabbing at Eleanor like a weapon. "She attacked my boy." Attacked? The woman who had just saved his life was being branded as the threat. The crowd froze. Some shifted uncomfortably, others let out nervous laughs, but not a single voice rose to defend her. Eleanor said nothing. Her breath was steady, her hand still resting on Leo's trembling shoulder. In her eyes, the boy wasn't guilty of anything. He was just unlucky enough to have a father who saw an enemy before he ever saw his own child. So who was the real danger here? The guards rushed forward, but Sarah Jenkins, a brand new sales associate, ran out first. Her voice shook as she tried to calm the storm. "Mr. Vance, there must be some mistake." She didn't get to finish. Mason shoved her aside like swatting away a fly. "Mistake? Look at her!" An old black woman, dressed in rags, was lying on top of my son. "That's a mistake? People like her sneak in here to steal or beg. Nothing else." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few chuckled under their breath. Mason soaked it in. He always loved turning any moment into his stage. The most chilling part? Through it all, he hadn't once asked if Leo was okay. The boy was still shaking in Eleanor's arms, fresh from nearly being crushed. But Mason's glare never left the woman who had saved him, as if she were the criminal. This wasn't a father shaken by almost losing his son. This was a billionaire whose ego outweighed his humanity. Slowly, Eleanor rose to her feet. She brushed the dust off her worn coat. No arguing, no explaining. Just a quiet, steady stare at Mason that made people shift uncomfortably. And then, instead of leaving, her gaze drifted toward the Citation Longitude gleaming nearby. Its polished body reflected the hangar lights, the faint smell of jet fuel still in the air. To Mason, it was just a trophy. But Eleanor's tired eyes lit up like she'd spotted an old friend. "Left aileron. Hydraulics feel loose," she muttered almost to herself. Marcus Thorne, an older businessman standing nearby, caught it. His brow creased. A comment like that didn't come from a random trespasser. The way she glanced at the open cockpit, the way her eyes moved across the instrument panel, it was second nature, like muscle memory that never fades. Marcus didn't say a word, but curiosity sparked in him. A woman dismissed as a beggar had just said something so precise it sent a chill through him. Maybe, just maybe, they were all judging the wrong person. Mason wasn't curious at all. He barked out a laugh, cutting through the thick tension. "Hear that? We've got ourselves a mechanic in the hangar now. Some old hag who looks like she dug her coat out of a dumpster thinks she can teach me about jets." The crowd reacted. Some gasped. Some lifted phones to record. Whispers flying, "Post this on TikTok and it'll blow up." A few whistled mockingly, while others stood stiff, faces souring. Mason took a half-step closer, performing for his audience. "The last time you were near a jet must have been scrubbing its toilets, right? Don't fake it." Laughter bubbled up again, though mixed with uneasy murmurs. Sarah flushed with shame, her chest tightening. She wanted to shout in Eleanor's defense, but her voice stuck in her throat. Marcus stayed silent, but his eyes turned cold. Eleanor didn't respond. Her gaze slipped back to the cockpit, softening like she'd glimpsed a long-lost memory. In her mind, the howl of wind around the fuselage returned. 50 years had passed, yet it felt like yesterday. Mason saw her silence and grew more smug. In his world, silence meant surrender. But sometimes silence is what makes people tremble the most. He stepped closer, voice grinding low. "You like this jet so much, huh? Beautiful, isn't it? Bet you dream about it every night in your dingy little apartment." Eleanor finally spoke. Her voice was calm, even, steady. "It is a beautiful machine." That was all. But to Mason, those few words hit like a slap. "Beautiful?" he sneered. "No, you don't get it. It's not just beautiful. It's power. It's a class. It's the line between me and people like you, and you will never touch it." The air thickened. Guests exchanged glances, some shaking their heads. Sarah stepped back, fists clenched tight. Marcus folded his arms, eyes dark. He knew Mason was crossing a line. But Mason didn't stop. His voice rose, filling every pocket of silence. He was climbing higher, and everyone saw it. "Fine," Mason announced, spinning with arms wide like he was on stage. "I'm in a good mood. I'll give this old woman a chance. Everyone here will be my witness." He dropped his voice for drama. "If she can fly this jet, I'll give it to her." The hangar erupted, not with laughter but with stunned gasps. Some jaws dropped, some hands flew to mouths. A $30 million jet tossed into a bet like it was pocket change? Unbelievable. Sarah went pale. "Mr. Vance, this isn't right." Marcus stepped in firmly. "Mason, enough. This has gone too far. Get out of my way." Mason snapped, brushing him off. "She wants to act like she knows? Fine. I'll give her the chance. To humiliate herself." The crowd buzzed. Some shook their heads, others whispered, "Will she dare?" Gone were the mocking laughs. What lingered now was raw curiosity, edged with unease. Mason held his chin high, convinced victory was already his. But cruel jokes have a way of snapping back. Was this the end of Eleanor's humiliation, or just the start of Mason Vance's nightmare? The air in the hangar felt heavy, like someone had poured lead into the room. After Mason's arrogant challenge, everyone waited for Eleanor to laugh awkwardly or beg for mercy. But she didn't laugh, and she didn't beg. The 62-year-old woman stood tall, her dark eyes locked on the man who had just humiliated her. Inside, she still felt the echo of saving Leo. The small body pressed against her chest. The boy's quick, panicked breaths. The deafening thud of the crate smashing down inches away. And now, that act of protection had been twisted into a crime. She didn't scream, didn't cry. Instead, her voice rang out, sharp and clear enough to cut through the silence. "Is that a promise, Mr. Vance? In front of all these witnesses?" For a moment, the hangar went eerily quiet. Sarah clenched her fists, her heart racing. Marcus tilted his head, the corner of his mouth twitching as if he'd just seen a mockery turn into a ritual. And for the first time that night, Mason didn't answer right away. Eleanor's silence wasn't fear. It was the drum roll before a fight. Mason swallowed hard, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. The crowd was watching, cameras pointed his way. A man like him could never lose face to an old woman. He forced a laugh, but it came out stiffer than usual. "Fine. If you want to play, I'll play all the way. But on my terms." His voice rang loud, each word like a hammer. 1. When you fail, and you will fail, you'll kneel right here and apologize to every single person. 2. You'll pay for everything. Fuel, maintenance, all of it. 3. You'll sign a confession saying you're a fraud, a faker who pretended to fool us all. The crowd murmured. Some chuckled cruelly, but others frowned. Sarah went pale, lips trembling, but no sound coming out. She knew Mason wasn't just challenging Eleanor, he was trying to crush her dignity. Marcus folded his arms, brow furrowed. The line had been crossed. "Mason, that's enough," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This has gone too far." "Out of my way," Mason barked, brushing him off. His eyes flickered with nerves, but his voice still growled. "She wants to play? I'll let her destroy herself." All eyes turned to Eleanor, expecting her to shake her head, to refuse, or at least to tremble in protest. Instead, she gave a small, steady nod. "I accept every condition you just named." The room exploded in noise. Sarah gasped, clutching her chest. Marcus leaned forward, a spark in his eyes. Mason froze for a split second, then smirked, convinced she had just dug her own grave. But Eleanor wasn't finished. She paused, then turned to Sarah, the young woman still shaking where she stood. Her voice was clear, every word a pinprick in Mason's pride. "But I have one condition of my own." The crowd gasped. Mason narrowed his eyes. "And what's that?" "Mr. Vance will sign over this jet right now, and this young woman will hold the papers. If I fail, she'll tear them up. But if I succeed—" For the first time, Eleanor let a thin smile slip, sharp as a blade. "She'll file the registration immediately, and I will pay the transfer tax." The hangar shook with reaction. Some burst out laughing, convinced she'd lost her mind. Others looked at each other, expressions hardening. Sarah froze, her hand shaking violently. Marcus whispered under his breath, "God, she just trapped him." This wasn't mockery anymore. It was a declaration. Mason staggered. The demand was so bold that at first he thought it was a joke. But when he looked around, he saw faces watching. Not mocking anymore, but waiting to see if he'd back down. If he refused, he'd look like a coward. If he agreed, he'd gamble both his pride and his fortune. The trap was set, and he'd walked right into it. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but he still snatched the papers from Sarah's hand and scribbled his name in angry strokes. "Fine," he barked. "You'll regret this for the rest of your life." The scratch of a pen on paper sounded harsh, final. An invisible sentence had just been passed. Sarah hugged the papers tightly, her eyes wide. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. Eleanor stood still, face unreadable. And in that silence, Mason found it harder to breathe than when he was shouting. Eleanor stepped forward, gently took the papers from Mason, and handed them to Sarah. "Keep them," she said calmly. Then she turned, her footsteps echoing against the concrete as she walked toward the stairs leading to the cockpit. Each strike of her shoes was like a drumbeat. No one dared to breathe. At the base of the stairs, she stopped, hand on the railing, and turned back to Mason. Her eyes were steady, chilling. "They say regret is a terrible feeling, Mr. Vance. I hope you're good at enduring it." The words dropped like a blade. Mason's jaw tightened, his face pale, but no sound came out. Eleanor turned again, her steps slow but sure. Her thin frame disappeared into the cockpit. A sharp metallic click followed, the sound of a judge's gavel. The crowd held its breath. Sarah clutched the papers to her chest, heart pounding like a drum. Marcus whispered, a mix of awe and worry, "Now we'll see who she really is." Eleanor Hayes, just an old woman with nothing, or a legend returning from the shadows. Eleanor placed her hand on the cold metal railing, the chill biting into her skin, as if to remind her this wasn't a dream. Each step up the ladder echoed through the hangar, pulling every gaze toward her. Some scoffed, some whispered, "What's she think she's doing?" But no one dared step in her way. Inside the cockpit, the air was thick with the smell of old leather and oil. Eleanor paused, resting her palm on the back of the pilot's seat, eyes closed. A flood of memories surged. Foggy mornings at the airbase, the crackle of radio orders, her younger hands wrapped around a control stick just like this one. Years had passed, but muscle memory never fades. A soft sigh slipped from her lips, unheard outside. For Eleanor, climbing into this plane wasn't just about flying. It was about stepping back into a life stolen from her. Not because she quit, not because her hands had failed, but because one day they crossed her name off the roster and said coldly, "Time to retire, Captain Hayes. We need pilots who are younger, stronger, more masculine." She hadn't left by choice. She had been pushed out by a slammed door. And now, as she sat again in the pilot's seat, she wasn't just defying Mason Vance. She was defying a world that once said she no longer mattered. Her worn shoes hit the cockpit floor. She shut the door behind her, the click echoing like a gavel. Hundreds of buttons, lights, and gauges lit up in front of her. Not intimidating, but familiar. Her lips curved slightly. "After all these years, I still remember every single one." Outside, silence spread. They had come for a joke, but her calmness weighed heavily than any shout. Mason crossed his arms, trying to look smug, though the twitch at his mouth betrayed him. "Let's see how the hag manages," he muttered under his breath. Sarah, the young sales associate, held her breath. Her hands clutched the transfer papers like they were a live bomb. If she fails, it's all over, she thought. Marcus Thorne didn't laugh. He watched every detail closely. He'd seen countless braggarts in his life, but with Eleanor he saw something else. A familiar kind of calm, the kind only found in those who had already survived the edge of death. The crowd fidgeted, a weak whistle here, a nervous cough there, but the loud laughter was gone. When a farce turns real, the audience is always the first to panic. Eleanor sank into the seat, the harness tightening across her chest. Her hands moved over the panel with certainty, not hesitation. Click, click, whir. The engines roared awake, groaning like a beast stirred from sleep. Sarah grabbed Marcus's hand. "Do you see that? She really knows." Marcus didn't reply. His eyes said it all. This wasn't her first time. Mason barked out a laugh, too loud, too forced. Starting it up is the easy part. Flying is the trick. Just wait. She'll blow the whole hangar sky high. But his forced laughter only planted doubt in others. Maybe Eleanor wasn't just some nobody. Her fingers moved with precision. Each switch, each lever touched like greeting an old friend. No shaking, no hesitation. The master switch snapped on, indicator lights blinking to life, their glow reflected in her eyes. She eased the yoke, testing the rudder. A faint whine from the hydraulics responded. Engines thundered steadily like a second heartbeat. To the crowd, these were just technical gestures. To Eleanor, it was the language of the sky, the only language she'd ever spoken fluently. Marcus narrowed his eyes. That wasn't luck. That was a veteran. He'd seen rich men pose in cockpits for photos, but none had ever moved like this. Beside him, Sarah whispered, voice shaking, "This isn't random. She's lived inside planes like this." Eleanor remained silent, but inside, memories crashed back. Warning sirens, flames spitting from the engine, voices screaming in her headset, "Mayday! Mayday!" And her younger self, gripping the stick, holding steady in those final seconds, pulling her squadron out of hell. Fear had once walked her to the brink of death. That fear had forged her calm today. Facing Mason Vance's arrogance was nothing compared to facing a missile locked on her canopy. The crowd outside, once noisy with jeers, was now silent. The mocking had died. Breathless, they realized the truth. No one could fake what they were seeing. Mason sneered, trying to regain ground. "It's just the startup. Anyone with a manual could do that. Just wait." But his voice cracked. With every motion, Eleanor wasn't just proving she knew. She was demanding respect. And the heavy silence in the hangar was the first to give it. Eleanor pushed the throttle. The engine screamed, the floor trembled. The Citation lurched forward. "No, no way." Mason stumbled back half a step, sweat breaking on his temple. Sarah's eyes brimmed. She's actually taking it to the runway." Marcus folded his arms, steady as stone, whispering to himself, "She didn't come here for pity. She came to take back the sky." The jet shuddered, rolling faster, the wheels screeching against the runway, tearing through the last scraps of laughter. Eleanor tilted her head, eyes locked ahead. In that moment, she wasn't a humiliated old woman in a hangar. She was Eagle Hayes again. The call sign her squad had once shouted as she led them through missile-riddled skies. The wheels lifted. 1 beat, 2 beats. Then the jet shot upward. The engines ripped through the night, drowning Mason's desperate cry. "Stop!" Sarah dropped the papers, covering her face. Marcus shook his head, a disbelieving smile tugging at his lips. "She was never ordinary," he murmured. The Citation climbed, leaving a hangar full of stunned silence in its wake. Everyone knew this was no stunt, no show. This was the return of a legend. The only question now, would Eleanor land to prove them all wrong? Or was this her final flight? High above Miami, Eleanor gripped the controls with a steadiness that bordered on frightening. She wasn't flying to show off. She was flying as though she were speaking to the sky itself, to the youth that had been stolen from her. The Citation rolled, climbed, then dipped gracefully. A clean chandelle, pulling the jet up and around with perfect control. Then a wing over, the aircraft tipping in a sweeping bow to the glittering city below. In the hangar, the crowd sat frozen, breath caught in their throats. Marcus brushed at the corner of his eye, startled by the tremor in his chest. He had witnessed billion-dollar deals without a blink, but nothing like this. Sarah whispered, "She's not just flying. She's soaring." And Mason? Sweat drenched his brow. His throat was dry. Each roar of the engine hammered against his chest like a verdict. For the first time in his life, the joke was on him, and it was crushing him. The citation descended smoothly. Eleanor's hands never wavered, never trembled. She guided the jet down so gently it kissed the runway like a falling leaf. No bumps, no rattles, just silence and awe. The wheels hissed across the tarmac, then slowed. The engines wound down. The hangar was swallowed in a silence so thick it could be carved. Nobody dared clap. To clap would mean admitting they had been wrong all along. Sarah held her breath. Marcus gave a small nod, eyes alight with respect. Mason stared at the jet as though it had betrayed him, his face pale and hollow. The cockpit door opened. Eleanor stepped down, calm, unhurried, no sign of gloating. She moved as if she'd just taken a stroll, not flown a $30 million bird. Mason tried to swallow words, but nothing came. The crowd looked at him, waiting for him to salvage his pride, but he was frozen like a cracked statue. Eleanor stopped in front of Sarah, who clutched the transfer papers with trembling hands. Everyone expected her to snatch them away. She didn't. "Keep it," she said softly. Her voice was steady, almost gentle. Then she tilted her head toward the jet. "And tell your engineers to check the left aileron hydraulics. It's off by half a psi. One hard maneuver and it'll lose control." Gasps erupted. The crowd buzzed with disbelief. She hadn't just flown. She'd spotted a flaw the engineers had missed. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, not of fear but of awe. You just saved lives," she whispered. Marcus breathed out, "This is no ordinary woman. She's a legend." Mason stumbled back, shaking. His lips moved, but no words came. All he had left was shame. Eleanor turned to Marcus, and for the first time her face softened with a warm smile. "Marcus, been a long time. Germany, remember?" Marcus froze, his head dipped, lips trembling. "My God, it's really you." The hangar went silent again. She wasn't just someone who knew her way around a cockpit. She had been a comrade, a hero from a chapter of history most had forgotten. Eleanor said no more. She simply picked up her old plastic bag, turned, and walked away, leaving behind Mason Vance in ruins, a $30 million citation, and a crowd that had just been handed the most expensive lesson of their lives. On the table, the transfer papers remained, Mason's signature bold and undeniable, proof that he had wagered his fortune just to humiliate a woman, and lost everything. What would Sarah do with those papers? Rip them apart? Or file them, turning his arrogance into a permanent scar? In a world where money and power are often treated as everything, a woman who had been pushed to the margins proved that sometimes it is courage and skill, not wealth, that can force even the most powerful to bow their heads. Eleanor didn't need to keep the jet. What she left behind was far more valuable. A lesson that can't be sealed in a contract or sold for any amount of money. A lesson that dignity is not for sale. But think about it. If someone like her could rise again from the ashes, what about us, ordinary people? Would we have the courage to stand tall when we're looked down on? Or would we stay silent like the crowd did that night? The truth is, no one in that hangar was crushed by the falling crate, but plenty of them lost their character when they chose silence over decency. And then there's Sarah. She's the one holding those transfer papers now. Just a few sheets of paper, yet they carry the weight of $1 billion truth. They could expose arrogance for what it really is, or they could be crumpled and tossed aside like a bad joke. Which path will she take? And if it were you, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you rip it up, or would you keep it as proof that arrogance always pays a price? And if this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Toch Story. Because here, every episode is more than just a story. It's a reminder that fairness, courage, and dignity will always outshine jets, mansions, and fortunes.